All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Achieving the Hyperscale SOC Through Advanced Threat Hunting. My name is Tosan Marte, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at ActZero. I'm super excited to be joined by some of our experts. They will be sharing details of the inner workings of a hyperscale SOC, which is an innovative approach centered on data science. But before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. Below the screen, you will see 4 tabs. The first tab is used to submit questions during the presentation, so please use it. The second tab has attachments, and you'll find links here to resources referenced during the presentation. And the third tab is the Rate Us tab. So please use that to share thoughts and rate this webinar. And let us know if you're interested in hearing more topics around this, or any feedback at all will be helpful. Now, let's jump right into it. So, as I mentioned, I'm joined by 3 of our experts. We have Jennifer Mitchell, who's head of operations, Alexis Yelton, who's the head of data science, and we have Sean Hiddle, our distinguished security engineer. I'll pass it on to Jen. Please, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Mitchell. I am the head of operations here at ActZero. Realizing our hyperscale goals is one of the key accountabilities in my portfolio, and also one of my biggest passion projects. Where my area of interest lies is in not just the processes and the operationalization of service and various service deliveries over the course of my career, but how that intersects with high performance and people and how we work together. And so that's where I come into play in our hyperscale.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Jen. I'll pass it over to Alexis. Please, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alexis Yelton. I'm the head of data science here at ActZero. And I have been working with my team, which consists of both security engineers and data scientists, on driving the company's machine learning detections, and really finding ways that we can make the SOC both more efficient and more effective with our software.
Thank you, Alexis. And next, we have Sean. Sean, please, can you introduce yourself?
Good day, everyone. I'm the distinguished security engineer at ActZero. I have the fortunate or unfortunate past of being able to reverse engineer every major ransomware strain from 2006 until about 2018, or whenever it really peaked there. One of the things that I really enjoy about the opportunities with the ActZero MDR space is just being able to go after all of the new ways that the attackers are finding to get around conventional detection mechanisms, all the living off the land and long cycle attacks and so on.
Thanks, Sean. Now let's jump right into hyperscale SOC. Jen, what does this mean?
So if you read kind of through some of the hyperscale stuff, we talk about the thoughtful application of machine learning and AI. What that really means is we are trying to differentiate and innovate in not just the creation of our machine learning detections, which Alexis is going to talk about a little bit later, but also how we actually apply that to the detection and response space in a very thoughtful and meaningful way. And as a result, what we focus on quite a lot are kind of 2 things: efficiency and efficacy. And you know, in a lot of other industries and potentially companies within our industry, you see that there's this tension constantly between those 2 things. And, you know, some people tend to fall down on one side or the other. We talk about wanting to have a product that is both excellent and something that we want to be able to stand by, as well as being affordable to, you know, the non-enterprise companies that we target. And then, of course, we want to be a sustainable company and make sure that we maintain that over a period of time. So when we think about efficiency and efficacy within the SOC, we start talking about how can we actually realize that in an organization that is fundamentally at its core very volatile and reactive? And how can we move away from the stress of that volatility and create something that can be planned more significantly and that we can apply high efficiency workflows and other things to that space? So when we talk about efficiency first, we look at a situation where we have to unlearn everything that we know, right, about the SOC and operations, because as we start introducing these machine learning detections, they're creating the need for a new way of working, for a new way to introduce new structures, new workflows, ways for the SOC to actually operate. And so when we're talking about hyperscale within that, for us to actually achieve it, it is an entire ground up innovation for not just the tools and improving that and the machine learning detections, how we're using it, but how we're actually able to collaborate and orchestrate across the SOC, across data science, across security engineering, and put it all into one space where we have a perfect marriage almost of efficiency and efficacy together. And that's very important, that we don't continue to maintain the tension between the two. We lean very much into having to achieve both. And so, like I said, Alexis is going to talk a little bit about the machine learning detection, so I don't want to spoil all the good stuff there. What also needs to be mentioned in this as we talk about it is, whilst we are a very data-driven company and a lot of the decisions that we make are based on the fact that we track everything, we also have to create a very change-focused culture. And so we have to invest very heavily into the people that are involved in this process and who are actually operating on the ground, and who, the members of the SOC, members of data science and security engineering. You have to create an environment where you are retaining that staff and you are encouraging continuous learning and you are actively engaging them in the continuous improvement of those workflows, of those structures. Because fundamentally, we are in a company that is constantly innovating, and therefore we are constantly building and releasing new environments. And so you have to create this structure in which you're maintaining a stability of service, you're maintaining that stability of service at scale, and planning for that hyperscale and planning to be able to do that, but doing it in a way that you are retaining your people and they are happy to work for you and they want and are excited about the changes that you are making. So when you actually pull all of it together, you are looking at those things that you see on the slide in front of you. So you are looking at the efficiency portion, which is high efficiency workflow structures, innovative operationalization. You are looking at the efficacy, the machine learning detections, the tools, what we are doing to actually improve the quality of our product. And then you have to include psychology of the workplace, your workforce, how we're treating them, how you're retaining them, and then orchestrating those three things together is really what helps us realize our hyperscale dreams, fundamentally, not just goals. So then what does that mean, right? So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our customers? So if we look over to our next slide, essentially everything that benefits the SOC benefits the customers in turn. So we talk about reducing alert fatigue. We talk about reducing the alert volume, reducing false positives, and not just that reduction, but also then in turn enhancing and improving the prioritization of the various outputs of machine learning detection of our alerts. And what that means for us is we get to spend and plan to spend more time on the high priority detections that are actually going to be a threat or going to have a potential impact. And in turn, the customers receive the benefits of that. So rather than maybe some more traditional MSSPs where you see them creating a lot of alerts that go direct to the customer to the point where, you're not really looking at them anymore, right? Because you get so many and, it never really seems to be a huge problem. And so, what is the benefit in deep investigation? All of them, you very notably receive a small number of detections for us, but each one is thought through and each one specifically has to reach the customer. And so rather than being in a situation where you have to actually hire in anticipation of what we may send you. We are hopefully reducing workload on our customers, and as a result, passing down even our efficiency, our hyper efficiency, and our hyperscale to our customers, because they in turn benefit from that prioritization and benefit from the high quality investigations that we are able to do. And then because we had this kind of reduction overall of false positives, needless investigations, and just alerts generally, we are then able to plan for more threat hunting, right? Which is the more proactive side of the SOC that we maybe don't talk about as much. So we are able to pass down the benefits of not just what we're producing in the detections, but then also the threat hunting itself for our customers. I think that's where we are at that slide. So I think we'll pass over to Alexis at this point. I have teased a lot of the machine learning detections. I don't want to spoil all the good work that they're doing. So Alexis, do you want to talk about the detections?
Thank you. Yes. So I'm going to talk about what my team has been focusing on building, which are detections and automation based on machine learning. So we see this as essential to maintaining the hyperscale SOC. Machine learning allows us to build high quality detections. And in general, we find that machine learning is necessary to handle threats that can be very difficult for humans or rules to find. And the reason the machine learning is able to do this is essentially because when you're talking about software, you're able to look at a lot more data than a human could. So, you can imagine we can look at millions of records easily, where the human SOC just doesn't have that time. And in addition to just, automating, machine learning tends to provide higher quality detections because we're able to more effectively bring that data together. If you're just using rules, you end up getting a correlation rule. We're really not able to think through that data, and machine learning is actually thinking it through. In addition to machine learning helping in general, we have a very specific strategy for machine learning at ActZero, which we call holistic machine learning, where we're trying to create detections that would be better than machine learning you would get out of the box from software. So first of all, we try to look at as much data and as broad types of data as possible with our machine learning. So that may mean looking at different data sources, including cloud, network, and endpoint data in one model, or even within a data source. It may mean looking at a broad types of data. So for example, if we're looking at endpoint data, we may look at commands and scripts. We may look at operations that occur in Active Directory. We may look at processes starting executable files, etc. So having that broad input of data allows the machine learning models to understand the big picture of what's going on. In addition to that, we build what we call in-environment models, which mean that our models learn from all of our customers' data, but they are tailored specifically to an individual customer's environment. And finally, we use a human-in-the-loop method to continuously improve our models. So what that means is we work and collaborate effectively with our SOC. And when our models produce a detection, whether they're in development or in service, the SOC will give us information about that detection. They'll label the detection. They do the investigation. They consult with the customer if necessary, and they determine if that detection is a false positive, meaning that it's not a threat, a true positive where it is a threat, or a benign true positive where it is suspicious behavior, but the customer has confirmed that it is not, in fact, a threat. And then we feed all of that information, those labels, back into the models to make them better. So we can do that by retraining the models, which automatically takes that information in. And when necessary, when our models are not meeting our performance standards, we will take that information and manually improve the models. So this has allowed us to improve our detections over time. So just an example here, our original suspicious scripting models in their first year in service improved by reducing false positives by 30%, a little more than 30% over that time, and having no effect on the model recall, which is their ability to detect real attacks. So in general, having this holistic approach to machine learning has allowed us to create detections that produce fewer false positives, but also don't sacrifice our ability to find threats. That's important because of what Jen mentioned earlier. This reduces alert fatigue. In addition to that, our detections, our models provide better prioritization of detection. So when the model is outputting a detection, it doesn't just say this looks like a threat or this does not look like a threat. It provides a number along a scale. You can imagine it's a scale to 0 to 10 or something like that. So where 0 is, this is very, very unlikely a threat and we're not going to even inform the SOC. Or a 9 is, oh, this is very highly likely a threat and is likely to have impact. So this really allows the SOC to use a numeric system for prioritizing what needs to be addressed immediately. In addition to that, because our machine learning detections are what we call very high fidelity, meaning that they're very likely when they are escalating something to the SOC or to the customer to have found a threat, we're able to start automating response. And when you automate response, you're going to reduce impact on the customer's environment because the response will occur at machine speed. So that's sub-seconds response. And that's really the type of thing that will keep our customers secure. All right, so what does this actually mean for the SOC, for our threat hunters? Ultimately, it means that our threat hunters are given a small number of detections per day because we've already filtered out so many of those false positives. So that helps with alert fatigue, as mentioned before. So they're not missing real threats because they don't have time or the attention span to look at every detection that they're getting. As I mentioned earlier, our detections are well prioritized. And so the priority is based on that number of how likely is this to be a threat, probability, and also how likely is this detection to indicate high impact on the customer's environment. So this lets the SOC know what to focus on first. They know I have to address this within 15 minutes for the detections that are high priority like that. In addition to this, my team works on making sure that detections are packaged with additional information to make investigation easier and response rapid if we do need human response. So that means, for example, if we're looking at an account takeover detection for a cloud platform, we provide information about what else has happened in that account, what have past logins look like, what else has happened in that cloud environment in the past 24 hours. And this just means that the SOC does not have to build a large number of queries to determine this information. They have it right at their fingertips. So the take-home message here is that our strategy for holistic ML makes our SOC faster and more effective, and it makes our customers more secure. In order to enable that, we need input from security experts, particularly security experts with experience with machine learning and data science. And our distinguished security engineer, Sean, can speak extensively to that.
Absolutely. Thanks for that transition, Alexis. So let's talk about how important it is and how exactly we go about integrating experts from two very diverse fields, the fields of machine learning and security engineering, or just security detection space itself, the threat analysis area. I mean, in a lot of areas, these are two fields that collide in a lot of ways. They have traditional ways that don't exactly intermesh well. In some cases, I mean, people have heard about signature-driven antivirus for a long time. And of course, we're way, way past that in most detection stacks. But it's still a cultural thing where a lot of people want to get into a habit of writing Yara rules or things like that. So one of the really important things to be able to hit hyperscale in any way is to make sure that there's experts that can speak to and really in their bones understand exactly where machine learning systems would fall apart, the quantity of data that would be necessary, the type of data that would be necessary, as well as all of the security minutia, all of the different things that represent a given attack, what the memory layouts look like, as well as enough chops to be able to understand what the trends mean. So when building for hyperscale, one of the things that one needs to keep in mind is it's often much less expensive to build for the order of magnitude improvement, the 10x, than to build an incremental improvement. So it's important to think really large and make sure that the North Star is always in line as you build all the incremental pieces necessary to really realize what hyperscale would mean. Hyperscale meaning whatever you're doing today in terms of interaction, in terms of process, in terms of understanding, in terms of detection, review, everything else, it increases by at least 10x. This is a definition that some of our colleagues at Google have brought forth with a lot of their SOC paper as well. As we approach automation for a hyperscale SOC, we focus on automations, but really step back and think, what would be an order of magnitude improvement be? So, for example, in the case of the RMM attacks of like KCR, SolarWinds that we've seen this year, it's important to just not try to signature your way through it or create other incremental improvements for each of these attacks, but step back and really understand what the reason is that attackers are moving in this direction and what it would look like to build out at least as close to automated as possible solution for this at very large scale. And I'll get to this a little bit more as we go along. It's really important to understand the solutions in the space require people with deep understanding of both security engineering, understanding what the attacks look like and what can be done in the defensive spaces, but also what the machine learning solutions will look like at very large scale. There's lots of different models that can be applied, but which are the appropriate ones in a given situation? Are factors like inspectability of a model important, or is it just a matter of getting the detection and calling it a day? So another element is facilitating the feedback loop between true positives and new attacks and human evaluations in algorithm improvements. So I was fortunate to get on the train of using machine learning in computer security really early on. I started this professionally in the late 90s, but gone are the days of just kind of stand up a model that is better than human-only approaches and just stand it up and call it a day. I mean, we're at a point now where attackers deeply understand how to avoid that sort of architecture and really make it look like it doesn't exist in any way, or make it false positive at the attacker's whim, neither of which are usable. So it's really important to build systems that take the human into account, make sure that whatever level of inspectability or understanding of the model is given to the human, and make sure that the human understand deeply how to improve and modify and what's essential to build the model to the next stage. So for every attack set, whether it be fundamentally a new attack, an emergent threat attack, for example, or even a commodity attack where it's just increased at scale, engineers need to step back and ask if that development opens up a gap in the hyperscale forecast. Is the attacker gaining advantage in the domain, and is there something new that's needed in the threat hunting side or the analysis process, or does a model require additional features to give better inspectability, better understanding, better action of the environment? And the other thing is to understand if the scope of the attacks themselves have changed sufficiently to warrant handling to attain the 10x that's necessary for hyperscale, or even maintain what you may have achieved at one point. So there's been a number of times where we've seen things like attackers decide that conventional machine learning based security, where people are just standing up a model and calling it a day, can be easily avoided with living off the land attacks, where they're just using components of files that exist on disk already in a standard like Windows installation or whatever the environment is. And how would you go about dealing with that at a scale, assuming that all attacks kind of go that way? I mean, the majority of attacks we see these days are living off the land. I believe CrowdStrike's statistic is something on the order of 68% of all attacks this year were living off the land. So attackers are well past the point of believing that they have to just avoid the conventional machine learning approaches that don't involve humans. It's also really important to understand the reasons behind every trend. There's no end to the security news each day. I mean, today we have Microsoft Patch Tuesday, which may patch a 0 day that's been out for about a week in Microsoft Word, of course. So people are scrambling around for that. We also have a Mac side major vulnerability where Mac scrambled to patch. So there's just no end to news itself, both from the attack side and the defender side, as to what's going on in the field. But to be able to handle this at any scale at all, let alone hyperscale, one really needs to winnow these trends into the ones that need attention to maintain hyperscale. And the steady state attacks or steady state trends that still take expert analysis. Of these, it's really important to not just recognize that there is a trend, but to understand the core reason behind the trend and what that means for the maintenance of hyperscale. That's really where the magic happens. Is the trend because of a new threat actor? Is it because of new attack techniques? Did the attacker understand that they have advantages against certain defensive stacks? I mean, this is one that's been a bane for the majority of my career. It's been like somebody will create a new dream algorithm, whether it be ML networks or it doesn't really matter, methods of monitoring the memory space, and then the attackers find ways to entirely bypass it. So, and ultimately, is there just a new way that the attackers are able to attain their goals? Like everybody knows about the cases of using cryptocurrency in ransomware and things like that. It's been ongoing for far too long, but attackers are getting to a point where they're really selling initial access. They're trying to recruit humans or existing staff that have full access, so they don't have to do anything to hack into an environment. They just get it by buying an insider that is willing to be malicious. So it's only after having a deep understanding of what these trends actually mean where one can begin to act intelligently to solve the trends in hyperscale. And then, excuse me, another element is to really know deeply what's going on in real world applications. Now this is something that the attackers have really been doing in spades this year. We can see this with the KCA event, with a SolarWinds event, with Exchange 0 day and Hafnium, and really just the magnitude of resources that they're throwing after every exposure. The attack space moves so blazingly fast right now. So do the attacks themselves. So whenever there's any new attack out there, one has to begin asking themselves, was there a new feature released in an existing technology that opens up a new surface? I mean, like, does Microsoft Exchange really need to install a web server? Perhaps, but it sure opens up the attack surface there to things like web shells dropped as backdoors and so on. Or when attackers started targeting the RMM software like Cassia and SolarWinds, Atera, I mean, they went after a number of the vendors. Why did they do that? Attackers have kind of been camping in the living off the land space for a number of years now at an increasing space. But when they move into the RMM space, it becomes much, much more confusing for any security-minded people to understand what's going on. I mean, is it their managed MSS vendor that decided to push a patch? Is it IT that decided that they're using a new RMM product? Or is it an attacker that is hiding behind RMM software? So one has to really step back and ask, what does this mean for an order of magnitude improvement in hyperscale SOC? And then what does this mean for threats and attackers? So one of the evolutions that was really, really interesting, and I spoke to it briefly, was the living off the land migration, where attackers moved from using malware first to using only tools that existed on whatever system they compromised. So what this meant from a defender standpoint is that you can no longer take a detection first approach. It just wasn't viable. You can't just go and block everything and treat it as malware, because the file itself, in some cases the script itself that's being used in the living off the land attack is not malicious. It's the chain of several of them cascading together, or the intent of the attacker, that makes it malicious. And understanding this requires deep knowledge in what's going on in the environment, and in some cases, the person behind the keyboard. And that's something that's been ongoing for a number of years now. It's really well honed at this point, where it's just a set of off-the-shelf toolkits that most attackers need to use to really execute a living off the land attack well. Very well documented. But attackers move past that because conventional SOCs, people that aren't really armoring up their environment for a 10x thought profile, aren't able to get in front of. So attackers move to the next step already, where they're just paying insiders. The Conti, C-O-N-T-I ransomware family simply attempts to pay an insider to detonate their malware. So there is no previous step or attack chain or really any defense in depth involved here. It's just a matter of malicious encryption of files, and then the ransom notice pops up. And yeah, so the other thing that attackers have really been doing lately is there's been a huge amount of research into taking out security devices. So a lot of people have deployed EDRs or cloud technologies or endpoint antivirus or special anti-ransomware tools and so on in attempt to have deep defense in depth, which is great, of course. But the research, both in academia and on the malware side, of how to find a way to just either short circuit or otherwise take out the endpoint EDRs, the endpoint antivirus is really ramping up this year, to the point where even academia is just saying, here's the command that we run, here's the C code that we run to take out EDRX. And of course, we've just seen a huge amount of what we call at ActZero emergent threats. These are really the fast-moving threats where we have to step back and ask ourselves, is this actor sufficiently resourced to be able to get through any real security stack? So it's great when you have something proactive stood up to be able to stay in front of these, and we always celebrate those, of course, but it's important to really assume that that scale of actor did their homework and they can probably get through most environments. These are the SolarWinds and Hafnium and KC events again, of course, but stepping back, making sure that all indicators of compromise, indicators of attack, any fragment of an attack that we could look for in solid threat hunting to make sure that nothing did in fact get through. And then with that, augmenting any detections that need help and validating anything that did in fact catch the day zero version of each of these attacks. And with that, I think I pass it back to you for panel discussion, Tulsa.
Come in, so I'll add that into our discussion. I'll start off first with Jen. With the information shared so far, it's clear that the Hyperscale SOC is different from a traditional SOC, but I'm sure it's not without its challenges. So please, could you share some challenges faced by the Hyperscale SOC?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, because I think what we've heard here is kind of almost a summary of how we're trying to solve the known challenges of like a traditional SOC. But it is to be understood that by doing that, we do actually create our own. So in order to have an environment where you are trying to improve not just the actual efficacy, but also the efficiency of an environment, you are actually introducing a new avenue of change into that environment. Because the Hyperscale SOC is not an end state, right? It is like a continuous state of environment that we are always working on. And so even though one of the main problems that we're trying to solve is, how do we create order and planning and efficacy within what is a known volatile and reactive environment, we are, as a consequence, introducing new randomization and volatility into that environment. And so it's almost a contradiction in terms. And as well as that, we have to, one of our biggest differentiators is the level of collaboration that we put across the different departments in order to make this work. So rather than, Alexis doing the amazing work on the machine learning detections and then just saying, here you go, do with it what you want to do, that's just not how we operate. What that means is that when you are looking at your employees and when you're hiring them, you are actually adding now additional requirements into your staff. And so we already know that there is difficulty in hiring and retaining security staff. And so now not only do you need to look for people who can functionally do the work, you are also looking for people who are excited about and have the potential to be true change agents. And you are also looking for people who have the high empathy needed for collaboration. So you need not only functionally excellent in the security work, you also need them to be excited and confident in being change agents, but the ability to be able to leave an ego at the door to step into a room with a bunch of other experts and come up with the best possible solution. And so that adds complexity into how you run your organization. So it's extra recruitment load, yes, but it's also not just then also promoting or employing managers of those people. You need leaders. You need leaders that are able to actually, incite that excitement, right, and that change, and can coach people and mentor people into operating very effectively with this environment. So the result of us trying to reduce a lot of things, reduce the volatility, reduce the reactivity, be more proactive, is we actually introduce more change, right? And that can be quite hard to deal with. That's probably one of the main challenges that we create ourselves as a result of the hyperscale initiatives that we're on.
Thanks for that insight, Jen. I'm going to shift things just a little bit. Sean, question for you. Automated detection isn't cutting it anymore, clearly, from what you had shared. There are vendors and tools that have built-in ML models to detect malicious files. How is this different from the ActZero approach?
Yeah, really good question. I remember, I think it was about the 2012 RSA, where it just seemed like every vendor was standing up on a table and yelling, "We have more machine learning, we have more machine learning." It was completely out of hand at that. And we're, of course, way, way past that. I've been fortunate enough to have been involved in the creation of several different ML-based threat protection systems at scale since the late 90s. And there was a time in like the early mid 2000s, let's say 2000 up until maybe 2008, somewhere in there, where ML provided pure ML in the sense of create your model that will detect every threat that you know about and tries to predict in the future, and then stand it up as is, where that in itself was enough to give significant advantage to the defender. The big problem that came out of this is that attackers learned to just blend into the normal traffic with long cycle attacks. I mean, a lot of these attacks aren't something that happens in milliseconds. There was a time where everybody wanted to race to the time to detect as small as possible, but a lot of these attacks are no longer in milliseconds or seconds. They're like days, weeks, or even months. Some of them will span seasons. The attacker will begin getting into a network, establish a foothold, do a bunch of reconnaissance or maybe no reconnaissance, and then just wait. And then they may sell that access to a completely different attacker body, or just come back in a couple months and make sure that nobody's watching sufficiently. These, along with the living off the land attacks, where attackers are only using things like PowerShell and other legitimate tools, according to CrowdStrike, again, that's like 60% of what CrowdStrike saw this year. So the vast majority of attackers are acting this way. But what this means for the conventional ML-only approach is that the vendor will have to either knowingly incur so many false positives that nobody would want to review these detections, and certainly not let them block anything, or they'll have to let threats through, knowingly do so. And this happens at training time, when you have to decide if you're okay with your with the quantity of known attacks that you will detect, or if there's just too many false positives. And one of the big differences at ActZero here is that we resource really, really heavily in this area. We have something on the order of 12% of the entirety of our headcount in the company is within security engineering focused data science. So this means we're able to take a lot of the really creative approaches that Alexis went through, the things like models that are tailored to each environment, the in-environment model, something where it isn't a matter of having a model available for everyone and it'll just have whatever false negative rate that it has, because in one environment, they happen to use things like very deeply obfuscated word macros and things like that that look malicious in everybody else's environment, but they would be far too noisy to publish that to everybody. We're able to create models that work in one environment, one customer's environment that doesn't behave like that, and as a result have much better efficacy. And then the next thing is we take the augmented intelligence approach. I mean, this is taking the approach that the output of the ML solutions isn't a detection in itself in the conventional sense, but rather it's guidance for a threat hunting team that will consume that and be able to understand what the model had and take that to its final verdict, its final action.
Thank you, Sean. In your response, you mentioned something about in-environment models. I think this would be a best suited question for Alexis. In your presentation, you spoke about in-environment models, which utilizes information from our customer environment. Could you provide more details about this?
Sure, yeah. So as Sean said, we are trying to build our models to do two things to make them effective in environment models, effective models for a particular customer. So one, they use data from all of our customers, because we find that data from other customers can be relevant and helpful for understanding a different customer. This is particularly helpful when we get a new customer, because we don't know anything about their environment yet. So we need to have that data from all the other customers. But in addition to that, the models are tailored for each individual customer. So there are a number of ways to do that. You can have specific models for each customer, for example, or you could have specific what we call features, so data focused on that customer that lets the model know that it is what's relevant to that customer. But either way, we're trying to help the models hone in on what's relevant to a specific customer. And in addition to building the models that way, we have set our KPIs per customer, such that if our model metrics show that our model is not performing well for a specific customer, then we revisit that model to make sure that it does perform well for that customer. So we're really trying to take an approach where we have models that really help each individual customer.
Great response. Sorry, I wanted to just jump in and ask, do you have any examples or numbers that you could share around the false positives?
Sure, yeah. So an example of one of our models is a model for detecting account takeover in Microsoft Office 365, which is a cloud platform. And that model uses data, a lot of different data that we find in that environment, and looks at things for an individual account, what's going on in an individual account. So we find that per 500 accounts that a customer may have, we see one false positive a month on average. So we're able to reduce the number of false positives that you would see with that kind of model, with our particular strategy of building these.
Okay, awesome. Just checking on time. I think we have a couple of questions that actually came in, so I'm going to shoot this over to Sean quickly. The question from the audience says, we have about 1,500 endpoints, and we have an ADR in place. Isn't that sufficient to detect attacks like RMM or living off the land attacks?
Yes, so that's a little bit hard to answer directly. Of course it can be. The thing is that EDRs are really, really complicated telemetry generation machines. I mean, at their core, they're designed to provide event information to security experts. They're not meant to like just set it and forget it. For a company of this size to really do well, it would be something like having a team of like 6 to 10 experts to handle this 24/7. I mean, you could get by with less if you're just turning off your network or something at night and weekends, stuff like that, of course. But often the time that you need your network the most are those after hour times and weekend times and stuff like that, unfortunately. And I mean, the job market is super, super tight in this field right now. I mean, if somebody knows of like 6 to 10 experts in this field, I would love to know about it. We're trying our best to recruit a whole bunch more, as are a lot of other people. So that's kind of a unicorn type of thing. Of course, an alternative course is to find MDR service that understands the attack domain. One of the big focus of our 2021 investment is in the detection of remote monitoring and management attacks. Excuse me. RMM attacks, all the SolarWinds and Terra, Kaseya, all these things that have been ongoing. Why are we investing so heavily there? It's where the attackers went. We talked about a little bit earlier, but for somebody just to stand up an existing security stack, really it doesn't matter what one spends on, and then be able to hope to understand if there was an RMM attack in the environment would be, I don't know, it's a fanciful situation. Each of these RMM vendors has 10 or 12 core features, and each of these has 4 or 5 different ways that they can go about using each of those features. So we're already at 40, and then it's a very, very long tail space. There's probably 20 vendors that are really, really heavily involved. So we're getting larger and larger and larger into the knowledge space that any body of EDR review would require. And this is on top of all the living off the land or malware or any other attacks that people may have thought that they could just turn to EDR in the past for. There's a blog that we wrote on RMM attack surface that I believe is included as an asset in this presentation as well.
Yes, that will be available, folks. So attendees, using the tab below attachments, you should be able to access that information. So we had a question that came in. I'll throw it to all our panelists here. With the length of time associated with attacks, how long are the MDR records kept in our platform, or how long are they accessible to the customer? Jen, do you mind speaking on this briefly? And then Alexis.
I think Alexis is probably the best person to talk about that, as we kind of different forms of the data storage that we use for different reasons. So
sure, yeah. So we're keeping a year's worth of data available to us, which is what allows us to actually build these detections that may detect long cycle attacks, or have enough data to provide very precise and high fidelity detections. In terms of what is available to the customer, that data currently is available to the customer for that year time upon request. I don't want to spend too much time talking about roadmap because no, I'm not really supposed to. But we're working on a roadmap item to provide more, easier accessibility to the customer through a log management solution. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
And please, if you have any follow-up questions to that, feel free to reach out to us. So I'll ask the final question for our panelists. I'll start with you, Jen. So for IT leaders considering the hyperscale SOC approach or looking to bring on a vendor with a hyperscale SOC, what questions do they need to ask?
That's a good question. So I'm kind of going to skip over the normal things, right, where you're assessing features and kind of the technical offering. If you're specifically trying to ask about their approach to hyperscale, or indeed look at your own organization to see if it's something that you're capable of approaching, you need to look and ask about what is their strategy around how they prioritize a lot of the alerts and stuff that they're setting to a customer. And if for yourself, what is the strategy and the philosophy around that collaboration aspect and that thoughtful application, right? Because we're back to that same thing, that thoughtful application of machine learning. Now, there may be different answers to that. People looking at hyperscale, and the specificity of that is not necessarily what I would watch out for. I would watch out for if they're actually thinking about it at all. And so if someone is truly looking at a vendor with a hyperscale SOC, and that vendor truly claims to have a hyperscale SOC, they should know instinctively, without necessarily even having to prepare anything, how they approach this problem and their philosophy to approaching this problem, and how they collaborate and how they operationalize stuff and how they actually think about that prioritization. And so if they don't have an answer to that, that's probably a little bit of a red flag. Because if you're only focusing on either efficiency or efficacy and you're not looking at the orchestration of all of those pieces together, then there's a slim chance that you're truly achieving that hyperscalability. Kind of different than if you're looking within your own organization, because you have to look at the capability of your existing staff and whether or not your company is willing to put forward the investment in both, time and money into probably recruitment, the technology, and then the actual leadership to be able to achieve this. So it's probably a very honest introspection into, can we and do we want to do this, and do we want to do this with the existing stuff that we have in place. That would probably be the main things what I'm thinking of from that leadership perspective, when you want to pick out whether they're truly thinking about this problem or not. Alexis, Sean, from the technical assessment, is there kind of more pieces that you would ask to really kind of pull out who's truly doing a hyperscale SOC?
Alexis, you weigh in. Do you have any questions that an IT leader needs to consider?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. So, but I'm a data science person, so I like to focus on data and metrics if you want to get real answers. What we find is that many other vendors don't have a lot of metrics around how well they're performing in terms of efficacy. And to be fair, it is difficult to find metrics that are unbiased in the security space. It's easy to say, well, I hit on all the things that MITRE said, and therefore you are more secure. But MITRE, of course, is missing many things as well. So I definitely recommend asking about those metrics. We tend to use recall, which tells you how many of a group of threats your detection is catching, so what percentage, and then understand what is that out of. Where are they getting the threats that they're testing against. We also like to use this number of false positives per time, per endpoint, etc. So that tells you how much you're going to have to deal with unnecessary alerts. And then it is also useful to use some of the more standard metrics, the mean time to response, mean time to recovery in particular is a good one, I think. Sean, maybe you can explain why that is the better mean time metric.
Yeah, mean time to recovery is one that really got a bunch of focus this year, but it's one that makes a lot more sense to me. I mean, time to detection is great if you detected something, but in a lot of cases, when you're getting a detection, there's also a lot of false negatives, a lot of misses in the environment. It's very rare at this point that an attacker will just launch one attack and call it a day. They're typically going to be using what I refer to as more of an attack forest, a set of trees rather than one branch where they just launch one attack. They'll launch 30 of them in one area and then 20 in another. And collectively, I call this an attack forest. And when you get an a detection, you've blocked one element of this, one branch within this forest. So what else exists there? So mean time to recovery, how long is it going to take your organization with all of your security spend to recover from that event if it succeeded? So you might be able to go and ask your vendor if they detected the Casey attack. And I mean, if you ask them today, I'm sure every vendor is going to say 100% because everybody's had several months to be able to react to this. But the Casey event was a ransomware data exfiltration case at its core. So I mean, just within ransomware file encryption, there's something like 50 different unique ways that ransomware has used over the years. And this is across all variants to encrypt the files. So were there in fact solid mechanisms that would stop all attack branches within that attack forest as they get to the encryption stage? Is there something robust enough to go across all of that? And did the vendor need to change it after the Casey event, or did it actually exist?
All right. Thank you so much, Sean. I'll wrap things up since we're pressed for time. But first of all, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists. This was great information. So before we wrap up, I wanted to be sure that I make mention of the resources that we have available. So we have 3 resources available for you that's going to shed more light on the topic. So we have Threat Insight on RMM attacks. This piece details how attacks on RMM work and how to mitigate risk. We also have a CXO Insight piece on the Hyperscale SOC. So if you're interested in building a Hyperscale SOC, this will actually provide you some details. Lastly, we have a meaty white paper. I like to call it meaty because it involves 8 of our experts, and out of the 8, 3 of them spoke on this webinar. So if you're interested in getting more details on the Hyperscale SOC, please take a look at these resources. Please be sure to rate us. Would love to hear feedback from all of you. So if you don't mind, please rate us and provide us with notes on if you are interested in hearing more about this topic or anything of that sort. And that is it. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Goodbye.